Okay, we're rolling.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think you know that I am Leonard Peikoff, and I'm recording this brief greeting to you about 3 weeks before you are hearing it. My reason for being unable to be present myself with you is health. Don't draw conclusions from that I'm about to die. I don't think that's true. But I have uneven days of good health and bad health, strong and weak, and I don't make a commitment anymore to a serious event because I don't know which of the days it will be. I'm sure you know from my podcast that I have retired, and I actually have retired. The last philosophic work I've done is the Dim book and the podcasts. At the present, I am working in fiction, specifically in short stories. I started with the idea of a novel, and then I thought if I could live long enough, that would be a great thing. Unfortunately, the longest lived person in the United States died last year at 114, and I didn't think that gave me enough time, so I decided to confine myself at this point to short stories, which I find tremendous pleasure and great difficulty. I think I've talked in the past about the pleasure, but the big difficulty, just for your information that I'm having right now, is with philosophy. I always want a story that has a meaning, that has a theme, that has philosophic significance. On the other hand, these are short stories that I'm working on at this point, 3,000, 4,000, maybe 10,000 words, which is a fragment of a chapter of a regular novel. And how do you get a significant philosophic theme into such a short set of words? And of course, the answer is you have to present the meaning that you want in action. In action, not in conversation and discussion. And of course, it's very easy for me, having worked so much in philosophy, abstract philosophy, it's easy for me to have a conversation of 10,000 words on what is friendship, which I did have in one story that I tried. I even had one character quoting Aristotle's definition to another, and all of this in a short story. And the whole thing was a discussion, and somewhere in there he chose a good friend and a bad friend, and I zipped into bad consequence, good consequence, and then I rushed back to my attitude, world of safety. I'm learning now not to do that, to be able to conceive of events that are believable and that have a meaning, but you don't have to hit the reader on the head with the meaning. And that's even more enjoyable if you can do it. So I've come a far way. The first time I wrote a story, I sent it to my daughter, Kira, who's far more advanced fiction writer than I ever will be. I asked her what she thought, and she sent it back to me. She said, "This is not a story. This is a play. There's nothing in it but dialogue." And that's where I felt at home with people talking about ideas. So I've passed that, past many other stages. I do have to say that there are at present about 80 magazines on the computer or off that publish short stories. And I have submitted different stories to maybe 30 or 40 of them so far. And I have a large file of rejections. And in fact, I'm ready to write a piece on the different kinds of rejections and what it means about the rejectors. But basically, I've had some rejections that say, "We really enjoyed reading this. It's an excellent story. It's just too bad we have no space for it." Or the plain perfunctory, "Your manuscript has been delivered and read. Thank you for submitting it." Or, and this one I actually got from Ellery Queen's mystery magazine, "Why the hell did you send us something like that?" I don't think they used the word hell, but that was the implication. So that's where I am now. I don't lecture anymore, but I know that you're going to have a great conference. I did lecture for 25 years, I think over 25 years, and I always enjoyed these meetings. And I understand that your theme this time is the fountainhead, so let me just put a word in there. The fountainhead was my introduction to Ayn Rand and to objectivism. When I met her, she was just starting part 3 of Atlas, so of course I didn't get to read it until I was already involved with her and objectivism. So my life, in any meaningful sense, began with the fountainhead. That was my introduction to reality and to objectivism and to Ayn Rand. It's interesting that for a long period in reading Atlas Shrugged, I kept subsuming something in Atlas back to something in the fountainhead. Ayn Rand would often be there while I was reading some new passage in Atlas Shrugged, and her husband would be there, and I would read something and I would say, oh, this is reading the script of Atlas, and I would say, this is just like such and such in the fountainhead, and she would smile and she'd say something to her husband like, well, he certainly knows the fountainhead, but obviously she didn't agree that the two books were on a par, but she was very polite. I began to feel maybe this is a mistake to keep pointing out similarities, but that's what struck me until I finally got to the train ride sequence in Atlas Shrugged. And she said, did you read it? And I said, yes. I get your point. And at that point, I stopped making comparisons. But that still doesn't diminish the fountainhead in my eyes. I would say the fountainhead was the explosion in my life that reoriented and made everything possible. So whatever you can get more about that, I wish you the best in that. Now, since I no longer lecture or have anything to say, we thought it might be a good idea to give you a look at my home, my new apartment. And specifically, I've collected sculpture and various art objects for many years, and I have crammed into this smallish apartment all the best ones, at least the ones that I could get a hold of at this late stage. So we're going to give you a kind of sculpture-oriented tour, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Welcome again, this time to the tour part of this presentation. The first thing you see when you come in the door is a coffee table in the shape of two large books. Those two books are actually my first two books, The Ominous Parallels and Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Of course, obviously tremendously blown up, made of different material. One has a huge drawer full of whatever you want to put in there. They are have the exact same spine, same printing, same color as the actual books. And I got that through indirectly Dr. Suess, because he'd had the idea quite a while ago of getting a desk made out of his own books. And he went to this place in LA and asked for it, and they were happy to do it. He was delighted and showed it around. And some years later, I had a decorator, and he said, why don't you copy Dr. Suess and get your desk made of your books? So I said, great. We went there. Everything was fine. Then they said, let's see your 3 books. I said, well, I have 2 books now. I haven't got a third one yet. And they said, sorry, we only can give desks for 3 books. but for 2 we can make you a coffee table. So I took a coffee table happily. I'm delighted with it. And I tried, after I finished the third book, to find these people by every possible means. They just don't exist. So I just have to be content with this. But I do like it a lot. Now, sitting on it right now is a first piece of sculpture you'll see. It's not the most impressive of my collection, but it's by Michael Wilkinson, whom you may have heard of. He's famous in the galleries for doing inside-out sculpture. In other words, if you put your hand on the sculpture, it's completely smooth. But deep inside, he's made all the changes, so it looks like actual sculpture. He does brilliant work. This is something he did before he went completely into the inside-out sculpture. And I forget the name he called it, but the idea of it was, he explained to me, and I got that from him in his studio, that the woman was on top and the man on the bottom. And normally in a love-type sculpture, the woman is at the bottom and the man on top. And he said, so I said, is this like feminism? He said, absolutely not. He said, the man is her hero, and she wants to protect him after the tremendous battles that he has gone through in order to save her and his values. So he had a great word for name for it too. And ever since then, it's the strength of a woman loving a man for what he's done for her. You get the idea. It's a unique idea. Now, in the corner here is, in a way, the climax of the sculpture. It's called Phoenix Rising from the Ashes. And the sculptor is Philis Raskind. Let me spell that for you, because in my opinion, she is the greatest living sculptor in my knowledge today. Philis is Philis, and Raskind is Raskind. And she has this quality of being able to take the solid materials of sculpture and give them this sinuous, sensory, and completely original, ingenious construction. So that you look at it and you've never seen a man in that pose, and you can see the pose, he's just moving up, and the wings, and it doesn't strike you at all as, oh, it's just a man with a bird's wings. It's a complete unity, and you would recognize him if you met him on the street. So, and at the same time, it's the originality combined with her heroism. She's a great admirer of human beings insofar as they're human. She's a lovely person. She was my teacher. You'll see later something I did under her tutelage, not exactly of this quality. So I have placed that statue so that you can see it from key points in the room. As one of the things is just, I'm just happy to look at it and say, there is that in the world. So you check her out on, I'm sure she has a computer. Just look up Philis Raskind sculpture. Now, you are now seeing a Frank Lloyd Wright drawing of a home for Ayn Rand in Connecticut. She had been interested at that time in moving out there, and he wanted to do a drawing, and he showed it to her, and for some reason, I don't know the story, it didn't work out. Maybe, I mean, there's no use speculating. Either she didn't like it or he didn't like it, or both. But to me, to capture his drawing of his vision of her work in itself radiates a feeling. Now just over here, this golden cat is solid gold, and that was a brooch B-R-O-O-C-H, that Ayn Rand would wear when she wore a heavy coat. Women in those days, we're talking about the 40s, wore brooches as a normal accessory. And she had just solid gold brooch. She loved cats of all kinds. She once had 3 in the apartment, but she had a lot of lion and cat ornaments. She loved them for many qualities. She had cats named after Thomas Aquinas. She had, there was a whole thing in her life, cats, and this is, to me, was the most spectacular. So of all the jewelry that she left, I kept just this one. And then I put the frame. She never had it in her frame, but I wasn't going to let anybody else take it. I didn't know anyone I would trust to wear it and come back. If, you know, present company accepted, of course. So it's just remained there as the black background was just put in with the framing. Now over here is a bunch of things. I won't try to explain each one. The one on the top I put in today because I wanted you to see people have this idea that sculpture is just a solitary figure standing symmetrically, motionless, looking forward. And that is not true. As you see from some of the ones we've seen, sculpture can be flying, loving, protecting. And what's cute about this one is he's sunning himself. And his hand is up, protecting himself from the sun. So I was able to recreate the light as the sun so that it fits in perfectly. I always enjoy showing sculpture as real life, as not real life, but as something other than the Egyptian mummies, which is what people take as sculpture to be. Now, just one other thing here. This object, can you get that? I don't know if you can get the colors or not. This is typically Ayn Rand colors. Can you get that? Mm-hmm. And this one here, too.
They belong to Ayn Rand?
This one did, and that one did, not the upper ones. Now, this did. Now, these 3 were her liqueur glasses. So there was more, but only 3 when I got there. The others were mine. These we'll never know because half of those I found when she died, and the other half, I mean, they were there, and I kept adding to it, and no idea now. And this down at the very bottom was more regular love in sculpture. That was Philis Raskind's first piece, which we traded for because I didn't have the money, but we traded some electronic thing in exchange for that. So that takes you through this room. Now we can take a peek into the office here. I want you to see just 2 pictures. This is one. This is Frank O'Connor, Ayn Rand's husband, when he was very young, just starting out in the movies. And this was the equivalent of his portfolio. In other words, what he would show future producers in order to get roles. And he did get a number of roles in silent films. You can see he was a tremendously good-looking man, and as he grew older, he looked just like Gary Cooper, which is why she wanted Gary Cooper to star in The Fountainhead. This picture was over her desk, as far as I know, with everything she wrote from the time that she first got it to her death. There was never a time when she sat at her desk writing that those 3 faces weren't looking at her. So she loved to look at him and to mimic that. Now, right across the opposite wall is the original Llona portrait of Ayn Rand, which has been widely reproduced and which is an unusual way of doing it. which I'd have to leave to a painter to describe. But as I conceived it when I was putting it together, they were looking at each other across eternity. When he looked out in the world, he saw her. When she looked out, she saw him. That, of course, is a fantasy, but nevertheless, that was what decided that.
So who's this?
Oh, you're hit that one. Okay. That's me, and it had no artistic value at all, but that was me at 12 in 1945. A veteran came from World War II. I just knocked on the door and said, I'm just released from the war. I have no money, but I can charcoal portraits. So can I do one for you? And if you don't like it, you don't have to pay. So my mother said, okay. And I posed for not 10 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that. And he came up with this, and everyone was overwhelmed that he could do such a quality work. It actually did look really like me at the time. So my mother gave him all her sisters and relatives and all the rest of it. And I think the guy probably ended up doing quite well. But I like seeing a picture when I was that young, just to recreate that I wasn't always 210, you know. All right, now we're ready for, this is the room that I've never had an equivalent of. This is, I call it the art room. Originally it was designed for an extra guest room, but I decided my daughter lives in New Jersey, so I'm not going to need a room. So I put one room as the office and one room as the bedroom, and this room was left to be the art room. And here I got all my favorite things. Now, just as a quick survey, the two boxes here are all the books that I have written, or that, including books that students have edited. And there's a couple more still to come. So that makes me feel good. And right next to it, on the right and on the left, are my two teachers, Aristotle on the right and Ayn Rand on the left. And you'll see there's a lot of Michelangelo everywhere here. I want to get to this one. Now film those two together so that they can see them both at the same time. No, from the front it has to be. Okay, you got it now? Right. This is the story. This one, one of these, this model I did under Philis Raskind. She was my teacher. And I brought it home and was happy with it, and then gradually started to see the legs are to this and the arms are to that. Finally, I made a connection with the chief sculptor of Mexico. And I presented to him and I asked, can you fix this? Can you correct it? And he said, I don't do that, but I'll make another one, just exactly like yours, except he said, the face and the genitals I never touch. Those are intimate and personal, but the rest, I'll redo it the way a professional would do it. So he did, and I brought it home. And then people, I couldn't throw out one and I couldn't throw out the other. So it became an issue of, could people tell which was which? And it's very interesting to me that it split about 50-50 over the years. I was gratified that half the people thought that mine was the better of the two, but I don't think it was true. Anyway, this one on the right was my original. And this one on the left was the chief sculptor of Mexico. And I think if you go into it step by step, he definitely wins out over mine. All of these, I'll make a brief comment about the one in the upper right corner. Is a French 19th century marble which I found on the sidewalk in Manhattan outside of an old store that was trying to get rid of its accumulated objects, art objects. And I thought it was really good. And so I said, well, I'd like to buy this. They said, sure, we're trying to get rid of it. And it was very inexpensive. I can't remember, but something in the order of $200 or $300, whereas you would expect these things to be way more than that. The actual authentic French marble. Over here you see, of course, the David and the discus sword. Most of these are pretty well known. This is a Caravaggio, one of his most famous, celebrating, well, all of his youth and everything good that goes with it that you don't have anymore at 84. Now, over here, I put together this, these three, picked them from different museums because I wanted to give the idea of the universality of sculpture. So on the one is the boy, then the woman, then the old man with the baby. So you got the whole spectrum, male, female, young, old, you know, shaven with a beard. I tried to show that it's not just, you know, a few athletes standing in a corner. You can display the whole world through sculpture. And this brings us to the climax of the tour. So one of my top favorite sculptures. This is Michelangelo, The Dying Slave. And I give this as good a presentation as I can. You know, if you take white statues against a white background, they disappear. And so the problem with having a lot of sculpture is to have a background, a wall, a cupboard, whatever it is, that brings them out rather than to which they melt into. And here, I had no choice. We had to put in, and got the landlord's approval, a color that would give a niche for him to shine in. And so I picked that green and hired painters to put it in. And it makes it, in my opinion, this of course is perhaps subjective. I saw this statue at the Louvre, and I think it's much better presented here than the way they did. A whole bunch were plopped on the floor, one next to the other. And this one has the majesty that I think this statue deserves. I just want to say a word about the title of this is The Dying Slave. And people say, why do you want a dying slave at the head of the bed in such a crucial position? First of all, I don't believe that Michelangelo gave that name himself. We don't know what, if anything, he called it. But because the cords around the chest suggested a slave, I think from that, maybe some other evidence, that became the name. But from the beginning, I never thought that. When I looked at that face, it was not someone who had given up life and was waiting to die, but someone who was so satisfied, so happy with life that he closed his eyes just to wrap himself in the rapture, to revel in, to experience nothing but the joy. There was a kind of calmness because this was the way his life was. If you want to put it in very crude terms, I see this not as a moment before burial, but as a moment after climax. And as far as the ropes are concerned, I take the liberty of interpreting that as a t-shirt that he pushed up and not ropes holding him down. I once asked Marianne Sures, an expert art historian, Was it possible anatomically that it had the meaning I thought, or was there something in it that was incompatible with that meaning, some way that the body would have had to be if it was one way when it wasn't? And she went over it carefully, and she found one, I think it was a muscle or nerve or one thing that she said was incompatible with my interpretation. So I have to put down as a footnote that on that level, maybe I'm wrong, but I can only appreciate it on the level of what I see. And to me, that is an embodiment of the aspiration of wanting a happy life. So it's not the dying slave. That is the first painting of Ayn Rand's husband, Frank. He was just starting as a painter, and he got to the studio late, to the model late, and therefore he had to do just the back because the front was all taken by the people who got there first. But I thought for a beginner it was an excellent start. The problem was with the neck that he didn't have perfectly connected to the head. But as a beginner, without teaching, to bring out something like that to me was really, he was immensely talented in his field. So I always wanted to keep that as a memento. And then you know what? You can finish by this. This is the only thing that I see every time I go to bed. And you all know the reason for that. That is my favorite movie. And I can't imagine any longer living without some picture of that movie in my room. So when they were hanging, he said, "Where do you want this little one?" I said, "Right where I can always see it." That's it.
You want to introduce her?
Well, yeah, but are you ready?
Yeah.
Oh, Kiki, we needed to take a picture of you. You had to jump right in the way. Wait a minute. All right, you know what? Go up in the bed. Up here. Good dog. Good dog. And this is the king, the queen on her throne. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, sweet girl. Yes, sweet. Yes, yes.
Perfect.
See, you get a picture like that, see. She'll do this for you all day if you want to get a picture of it.
May I compliment you on your fashion sense, especially your shoes?
Thank you. Is this being recorded?